Welcome to Unreal Gems. In this video, we are going to see how we can switch languages when we are running our game or in configuration. Roll intro. So we are back in Unreal Engine. We are going to take a look at how we can switch languages or cultures in Unreal Engine, and we are going to first see how to do it with a tool that we have already used in editor preferences. Remember that we had the region and language section. In that section, remember that we had the preview game language, which we could choose between English, Spanish, or whatever cultures we have localized. So that's one way to switch cultures or languages in our game. And we remember that as soon as we changed that setting, whenever we started the game, it would change language. Another way that we have already seen is the globe section in the UMG editor. Remember that we could change languages and we could preview them. We could change cultures and preview them like we see here. For example, ESES, we see that the menu is in Spanish, and whenever we would switch the globe off, it would go back to the default culture. So that's another way of dealing with the culture switches. Remember that we could also use the standalone mode to preview the game language, but we needed to do this because of the fact that if we use the console command but outside the standalone game mode, it would also switch the editor, the engine language. We can see that if we type culture equals and we input ES-ES, we can see that the language not only changes in game, but it also changes in the engine. Let's go back to English and let's try the same thing, but using the console in the standalone game. For that, we need to first check the proper settings, because sometimes the console key does not work in the standalone mode. So if we go to the preferences, we can check that the key that we are using is the proper key. Project settings. Inside project settings, we can look for input, and inside input we have the console section and the console keys. As you can see, I have used the 0 key in the keyboard because it is easier to access than the other key, the default key. So that's that. Okay, so let's start our game in a standalone mode. And right now we are going to switch languages using the console command. We can hit the console key twice to get the other mode. I prefer the first one, so let's go ahead and open it up again. We are going to type culture equals and the language that we want. Right now you can see that the game is in Spanish, so let's go ahead and type EN for English. If we hit enter, we can see the interface changing. We can see orbs instead of orbes. But remember that the robot and the assets are not going to change until we reload the game. So we are doing that, and we can see that the assets have switched from Spanish to English also. So that's another way that we have seen in the asset localization video. And as you can see, it is quite handy to quickly test different languages. You can see now the robot and the messages in the proper language. But we can switch languages also while we are in game, since asking the user to use console commands would not be a good practice. So how can we do this? Well, we can do it from UMG. So I've added a combo box, and with that combo box, we are going to display the language options that the user can choose. In this case, we are going to have English and Spanish, since those are the localized cultures. And for that, we need to go ahead and switch to the event graph. And let's go ahead and see how we did this in Blueprint. Okay, so here we are going to first of all get the localized cultures. That's what that macro is for. With that, we are going to add each option to the combo box, one for each language. Next, when the loop is completed, we are going to set the selected culture. So for that, we need to know first of all what is selected by the user. So add options and then set the selected option in the combo box, which is going to be the current culture. So the culture that the user, the language that the user has in its operating system or he has requested using configuration files or the command line. This is going to return an ID. So for example, ES-ES for Spanish, but we need to show the user the readable display name. So that's what the culture display name is for. We can set the selected option using that in the combo box and then bind ourselves to the onSelectionChanged event in the combo box, which is going to receive a selected item, so an display name. And with that display name, we need to find the ID in the map with all of the cultures. So that cultures variable, that's why we have that find. It will find the ID of that selected language. And then we can use the set current culture with that string with the culture ID to set the current culture as the user wishes. So next, we need to clear the cultures in the combo box because we are going to add localized culture names, localized language names. So for example, English will go to Inglés and vice versa. Next, we need to get those new cultures. After clearing the cultures, we will get the new ones, the localized ones. That's what that localized switch is for. So we are going to add those new culture names using the add option function from the combo box and add those display names. When it is completed, we will select the get current culture option so that the user sees what he has selected as the main option in the combo box. And last but not least, we will do a reset do once because we need to open back up again the do once whenever we are finished. We are closing and using a do once because we need to not activate the onSelectionChanged again. And whenever we clear cultures, it can activate infinitely. So we are using that do once and that reset do once whenever we are done clearing cultures and adding cultures, so it doesn't fire over and over and over again and we get weird results. So that's what it's for. And now we only need to see what the get cultures macro and the clear cultures macro are doing under the hood. So for the get cultures macro, we can see that we are getting localized cultures. So in this case, it would be English and Spanish, Spain. You could get also targets like engine or additional targets, but in our case, we have everything in the game target, so we can get the localized cultures in the game. Next, we have a for each loop that get localized cultures will return a culture ID. We need, again, the display names. So that for each loop is just calling the get culture display name and it will store it in that cultures array as the display name as the key and the contents are the culture ID. This is to make easier the process of finding cultures whenever the user switches, and so on and so forth. You can see that this is a variable of type map that has two strings, one as a key and one as the contents, and that they are filled by the display name and the culture ID. This is pretty straightforward, so I'm not gonna dive too deep in this one because you can see that it is pretty easy. You just get the cultures and their IDs, and that's that. Next, we need to take a look at the clear cultures macro. This is even a simpler one. We just have clear options in the combo box to clear everything. And we also need to clear the culture map. So that's pretty much it. With this done, we can go ahead and open up the standalone version of the game. We now don't need to use the standalone, but since we already selected it, well, let's use it. We can go ahead and go to the menu, the main menu, because it's where the culture switching is implemented. And you can take a look at the translated combo box names. If we switch to English, you can see that everything is localized. So now the culture names are in English and Spanish. And you can see that the game switches to English. We had it in Spanish whenever we switch culture. Remember that we need to load it back up again. And if we want the assets to reload, and you can see that the game changes quickly the language, and we have our desired language only using blueprints and no console commands, no preview language, no nothing. Just blueprints and switching the game language inside the game. So that's it for switching game language using the user interface. But we may need to also change languages when we are debugging when our game is already packaged. So for that, we are going to see how we can use configuration files and command line parameters to do so. So first of all, we need to go to project settings, and inside project settings, we need to go to the packaging tab. Here we are going to find in the advanced settings the localizations to package. We can show localized, which is easier to find whatever we have localized. In this case, we need to add Spanish Spain because by default it is deactivated. So remember that. If not, when you execute the game outside Unreal, it won't work. So we can package the project using the usual commands. So if we click package project for Windows, we will get an executable. And with that, we will be able to change the language using the other methods that we have not yet seen. So for that, we are going to jump to the packaged version of the project and we are going to test it out. So here is the packaged version. Please remember that before doing anything, you need to double click on the executable, because if not, some of the ini files may not appear. So for example, the game ini and the engine ini may not appear. So please go ahead and remember that you need to double click the executable first, and then we are going to be able to perform the language switching in the ways that we are going to see. First of all, the operating system is set to EN, so English. If we start the game, you can see that the language is English, so what we expected, and we can again switch as before, but the game has started in English. You can use the console and change the language, of course, and you can switch to whatever you want. Okay, so let's get out of the game and let's test the next way. Again, remember that you will only have console commands if this is like a debugging version, but with shipping profile, you will not be able to. Let's look for the engine.ini. In that file, which is the file that we have on the back, and the game.ini, we also have it open in VS Code. So in those files, we are going to be able to also change the game language. The priority is first the operating system language, but next the engine.ini will be the file that Unreal Engine will take a look at, so that you can choose your preferred culture. So here, if we use the internationalization tag, and inside that tag we write culture equals, and for example, if the game is in English, let's choose Spanish Spain, so es-es. And now if we save the file and we go ahead and execute the game, you are going to see that we have the game in Spanish. So menú principal and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's go back to the executable, and now the next in the priority line will be the game.ini. So with this file, we are going to override the engine.ini culture. So again, we choose the same tag, so internationalization, and culture equals, in this case, we are going to go from Spanish to English, so equals en. If we execute the game again, you're going to see that again it changes and it executes in English. So everything is good, what we expected, and now we are going for the last method that we can use to switch languages. So we need to create a shortcut. This is the easiest way of adding command line parameters to an executable using Windows. You could also run the executable from console, but I find this way easier for people not familiar with the command line. So let's go ahead and choose the culture switch. So space dash culture equals, and again we are going to switch to Spanish Spain, so es-es. We go ahead and execute the shortcut, important, and we can see how the game is starting up in Spanish again. So this overrides the game ini and the engine ini. So this is the last way that I know to switch languages when you are trying to debug the executable and you don't want to do it using the interface. So that's it for all the ways that we can switch languages in Unreal Engine. With this, I hope that you have all of the tools that you need to debug and change languages in your game. So lastly, I want to make a small summary that covers all of the topics in this video. So first of all, we covered how to change languages during runtime, so using blueprints and with the console. Next, we learned how to change languages during a startup, so with ini files and with the shortcut to use command line parameters, so we could switch cultures using those parameters. Next, we need to take a look at the priorities to change culture during a startup. So first of all, Unreal Engine takes into account the system language, so the OS culture. Next, it looks at the engine.ini, next the game.ini, and last but not least, it takes a look at the command line culture parameter. With that, it decides the final language that the game is going to use. And that's pretty much it. So remember to always compile changes before testing anything, and also remember the packaging options, because if not, whenever you test stuff, it is not going to work and it will probably be related to those things. With this, we know all there is to know about switching languages in Unreal Engine. Well, that's it for this video. I hope it has been useful to you. If this is the case, please go ahead, like and subscribe. We will see each other in the next videos.